carries the story of Jesus healing the leper. While he, this is Jesus, was in one of the cities, behold, there was a man covered with leprosy. And when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and implored him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And he stretched out his hand, this is Jesus, and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately the leprosy left him. And he ordered him to tell no one, but go and show yourself to the priest and make an offering for your cleansing, just as Moses commanded, which is found in Leviticus 14, as a testimony to them. But the news about him was spread even farther, and large crowds were gathering to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus himself would often slip away to the wilderness and pray. Now, leprosy is a fascinating disease. It's a disease with all sorts of stigma attached to it. These days, there are many different types of conditions which we attach stigma to, and one of the ones which I talk about in schools an awful lot would be mental health, in that there are stigmas attached to mental health, which we absorb ourselves. And so I'll just talk about the stigma of leprosy for a little while, after I've outlined a bit of the disease itself. So I've got my pen and my paper, and I'm going to draw a bit of skin for you. So those of you that don't know anatomy, you're going to learn some right now. So if I draw your skin layer here, this is the surface layer of skin. We'll draw a hair follicle just for you as well. So here's a hair coming in here, and there's the hair follicle itself. There's your sebaceous gland coming off there. Look, there we go. There's a hair follicle, okay? And about this layer here is what's called the dermis. This is the kind of generation layer. Your skin is constantly regenerating itself. So it's turning over, it's turning over, it's turning over. And so the surface part of the skin, which is the bit that flakes off and makes all the dust in your house, about 8% of the dust in your house is people's skin. Nice, hey? Going to dust now when I get home. All of that kind of sheds off. It flakes off over the surface. And in the kind of the dermal layer here, just underneath, you get all the nerves. So there's a kind of a whole nerve apparatus that goes on, and these nerves go off to the brain. And so you feel, because of the pressure that goes through the skin area, and it stimulates these nerves. And so fine touch, sharp, temperature, vibration, all of these are different nerve senses within the system, and they're all in the kind of lower level of the skin. Now, what happens with leprosy? Leprosy is a kind of like a bacteria related to tuberculosis. And so it's a chronic condition, Mycobacterium it's called, the type of bacteria. And it infects below the dermal layer and at the dermal layer. And so what happens is it affects the growth of the skin on the surface. And so you get these things called granulomas and overgrowth and undergrowth of areas of the skin. And because it attacks the nerve areas as well, it takes out the nerves. And so you get a slow, steady process of losing the ability to feel with that area of the skin. Now, it doesn't actually destroy the area of skin that it infects. What it tends to do is make you wide open to other infections because of the infection itself. So you're more prone to getting a cut infected, but you're also more prone not to recognize you've been injured. So people have been known to burn themselves with leprosy and never realize they'd burned themselves because there's no pain, there's no sense. They basically have been injured and they don't realize it's there. And so over time, this is a condition which lasts for 20, 30 years. Over time, loss of fingers, loss of limbs, bits and pieces like that can occur. And so it's a disfiguring disease. It's a chronic disease. It's a disease that continues degeneratively to destroy and destroy tissues. And you lose the ability to feel. Now, if you go down to the stigma line of things, and what used to be thought was that they used to think that tuberculosis was a disease of skin contact. Actually, we now know that tuberculosis, a mycobacterium that causes leprosy, is spread a bit like TB through droplet infection. So it's actually through proximity, not necessarily through touch, by which you get leprosy. And some people have a natural resistance to leprosy, and some people don't. So some people will get it, and some people won't when they touch them. It's about 95% of the population generally have a bit of an innate resistance to leprosy. So only about 5% of the population would actually get it. If it does infect you, it can go away within 30 days if you have a bit of internal resistance to it, which is fascinating. The other thing that's interesting is the TB vaccine that you're given. That can give you a little bit of resistance to leprosy as well. So there's just some interesting facts thrown out there for you. So what is the stigma? Well, the stigma was, if you go back in the history of it, the stigma which still very much exists in India today. There's 1,000 leper colonies in India today still. There are also leper colonies in Egypt, Romania. Romania's got some, and various places around the world. So there's a number. The stigma that's attached to it is that you cannot go near somebody with leprosy because you might get it. And if you go back to biblical times, leprosy basically represented this whole concept of you are going to forever, for the rest of your life, be unable to be in human contact with somebody that has good skin and is healthy. So, if a father got leprosy, they would never be able to be with their children again. If a mother got leprosy, they would never be able to be with their children again. They would never be able to be with their husband again. They would never be able to be with their own mother and father again. It would completely shatter and cut off all human relationships. The only people that you could be friends and family with would be people that have the same problem as you, leprosy. And so the leper groups formed, and they all used to kind of go around together. There's a story in the Bible about 10 of them all going up together to ask Jesus to heal them, and he does. And so this leprosy thing results in massive isolation. And the reason for the isolation is the monstrous kind of deformations that can occur because of the leprosy, the loss of the limbs, the disfigurement of the faces, and everything else. And so much so that lepers in the time of Jesus, they had to deliberately wear rags and wear things over their heads to show that they were lepers, even though the leprosy was covered up. And they also had to walk around shouting, unclean, 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 just so everybody knew not to go near them. So not only were they lonely, but they had to make sure they were lonely by removing everybody from their proximity. It was a responsibility for the leper to actually walk around trying to get everybody away from them so that they could be left on their own. I mean, how depressing is that? That's not just awful, that's terrible. You've lost contact with your family, your friends, everybody who you value. You've ended up with a group of people who basically share a common pain, and all you do is sit with this group of people alone sharing this common pain for the rest of your days. And so this is a terrible thing. And what they used to think was this is some sort of judgment on the person. They have some sort of inner filth, which has resulted in this external leprosy. There's an inner evil which has resulted in this curse that's come on their skin, a curse that's come on them as an individual. And so what would happen with the leper over time is they would begin to think, well, maybe I deserve this. Maybe this is my fate. Maybe this is my destiny. Maybe this is what God wants for me. Maybe this is my eternity. This kind of slow, degenerative, numbing destruction of relationships, destruction of friendships, and letting go of everything they ever cared about, and having to kind of disappear into this kind of covering of rags and walk around just making sure everybody knew that they were unclean and you shouldn't come near me. Not only that, but if you were to be around this time, you would have a fear around these people that if you would go near them, you would have the same curse. You would have the same problem. So you did not want to go and touch a leper. You didn't want to go and even be in the presence of a leper for fear of becoming unclean yourself, that somehow they would become toxic to you and that you would be destroyed because of them. And not only that, the leper would accept that that was the way. So these lepers would walk around thinking they were toxic to people. They were thinking they were just walking disease, and whoever they touched, they destroyed. And over time, that's the way they came to accept their existence. This is a nasty condition. And the stigma that's attached to it was so bad that you basically were kicking these people out of cities, and they would have to live on the outskirts of the city, away from the entrances, away from the people. You know, go away from us. We do not want to be with you. We do not want to be with you. And these people would just basically isolate themselves and disappear. There's no ability to speak with people you love. There's no ability to hold relationships anymore. They didn't have text messaging back then. And I guess the lepers would have been worried about losing a thumb had they been text messaging themselves. There was no ability to hold even a distance relationship. And so it was a slow, steady process of abandonment and loss. They did a study, years ago they did a study on little babies. And they were nursing little babies, and these nurses were instructed. There was one group and another group. And one group, they had to basically feed, water, but not nurture with any love, touch, or affection. So minimal possible, feed them, and then put them down and leave them to it. And the other group, they were told, you have to massage them, you have to kind of gurgle with them and play with them and do everything you can with them and give them as much love and human affection as you possibly can while feeding them. And they did body weight analysis of how they grew. And they found that the group that had touch, that were encouraged, were played with and everything else, actually put more body weight on than the others. They actually did better. They grew taller. They were better on the BMIs and everything else, all the way on the indexes, because they were touched and they had human contact, and these ones had minimal human contact. And so one of the things that we find in human experience is that we flourish when we have people around us that love us and care about us and we do well, but we don't flourish when we are isolated, when we are on our own, when we're not touched, when we're not looked after, and life begins to sink that way. And this is what would be happening to these lepers. This is what would be happening to them. They'd basically be slowly not flourishing physically. Not only is their physical condition stopping them from having human contact, but the very fact they don't have human contact degenerates their human experience more and more and more and more. So this is our lepers. Now, did they deserve their fate? That's the big question at the time. If you go around Jesus' time and you look at these Pharisees, then the big question was, well, do they deserve what they have? And as a leper, they're probably sitting there thinking this: I'm afraid of being around people because I don't want to hurt them. I'm afraid of being around the people I love because I don't want them to I don't want to hurt them with my disease. What did I do to deserve this? And they start to analyze and find reasons why. Well, my face is ugly, or my body's hideous, or this about me is terrible, and this is about me is where I've failed, and this is about... And so therefore they have to think, well, this is what I must hate about myself because everybody else does. This is what I must hate about myself because everybody else finds that hideous about me. And so over time, the lepers would have become unlovely in their own minds. They would have become afraid of exposing themselves in their own minds, and they would have been walking around with this sense of shame and untouchableness. And I don't want to be tainted or to taint anybody else. This kind of slow curse that they walk around with.